Corla. I have to say, Minister, your sniping and interrupting of the deputies during this debate does not augur well for a solution to this matter, and to me it represents what has been the persistent attitude of this government, which is one of essentially trying to minimise the scale of the problem and deny that it exists, when every single one of your backbenchers knows that what we are talking about here is an absolute crisis of proportions which have not been seen probably in decades at this stage, and to deny it and interrupt is not serving the citizens of this state. And to just say where are we going to get the money when you hand over tens of billions to banks, to me is just unacceptable, and it's doubly unacceptable for a Labour minister. I have to say, in some ways, this discussion is demoralising for all of us that we even have to have it. There is something almost overwhelming in the fact that we live in an era where for decades we've been able to send people to the moon, or wherever we're able to send unmanned drones to go thousands of miles. We live in an era where there is a society has accumulated wealth greater than at any time in our previous history, and yet one of the most basic human rights, the right to shelter, is seen as too much of a luxury. Not in some so-called third world country, but here in a so-called advanced capitalist country, and one that has been through an unprecedented boom, and a lot of that boom centring on the construction industry itself. I mean, you really couldn't make these things up, because it should be a starting point that a roof over someone's head is not just bricks and mortar, it is a human right, and delivering that should be where you start off, because it is the foundation of so many other aspects of life. Human health, for example. We know of citizens whose mental health and physical health is being irreversibly destroyed because of the accommodation and the inadequate accommodation that they're forced to live in. We know, all of us, that children's education is suffering because their parents have to uproot them on a regular basis from their communities to send them to other areas and start all over again. Those children will never recover from that. This affects all aspects of life, and it is an absolute indictment of neoliberal capitalism. And you know, I'm sure you've heard the joke, Minister, where, you know, post our construction boom, we'll be the first generation to stand in a field with our children and say, oh, I remember when this was all houses. A legacy of an unregulated market where houses were built on floodplains, where houses were built with pyrite literally falling down around people, fire safety hazards and so on. The same lack of regulation which was highlighted by the judge in the court case yesterday. And it is proof positive that the free market doesn't work. The only way in which the housing crisis is going to be sorted out is a massive state-led programme to build and regulate the housing market. And we are paying the price of an over-reliance and an over-facilitating of the private sector to deliver housing. And as a result of that, we have some people who've become very wealthy, other people whose basic needs aren't being met, and the greatest scandal of all, in some ways, that the state is paying more for a more inadequate service. Now, the government has made much of the point that we live in constrained times. You made the point there a minute ago, Minister, we haven't got the money and so on. But the reality is that the rot had started long before your government came into power. I was a councillor in Fingal County Council for 13 years, and I have to say, even during the boom, there was an incredibly limited house building programme of state-led and state-built accommodation at that time. And one of the key reasons was the failure to implement the Kenny report and control the price of building land. And yet we manage to spend hundreds of millions every year in subsidising the private rental sector rather than delivering a national house building programme. And let's face it, the excuse that you're putting together in terms of house building is pathetic. I think that we do need to firstly recognise that there's a crisis, and that hasn't been the government's approach. It hasn't been your approach so far tonight. All of us have been met with devastating cases where the first time in a long many years of being a public representative, where on essentially a daily basis both myself and my staff have to turn around to people and say, look, there is absolutely nothing we can do. And the reason for that is there are no houses available within the range of prices on government rent supplement levels. Even if there are, the landlord won't take rent supplement, and this discrimination against people in receipt of a welfare payment has not been outlawed by this government, which I think is disgraceful. And then not enough houses are being built, and we're telling people, actually, you're only on the list for 6 years, and so on. So people are given the choice: move out of the area, uproot your kids from their school, lie and make up the difference yourself, and we all know that everybody is doing that, to the tune of hundreds of euros, and pauperising their families, or go into homeless accommodation, which is totally inadequate and is costing the state more. I could have spent my whole 7 minutes giving tragic cases in my area. A young family with a son in a wheelchair forced into homeless accommodation, moving out of that, moving miles out of the area from the special school where their son is based. A woman with 3 children living in her car. A young mother getting nothing, spending 930 euros a month on a one-bedroom unit for her kids. Couples with children in hostels, coming from the city centre, getting their kids dressed and brought out to school in Swords. This is absolute lunacy. We need to address this matter. I haven't got time to develop the points, but one way of not addressing it is not dealing with the people who are in housing now, struggling with their mortgages, and failing to address the banks and adding to the homeless list that's there. We do need rent controls. Everybody else can do it. I don't see why we can. We need to immediately address the inadequate levels of rent supplement that are there in order to deal with it. And we need to deal with this mushrooming or ballooning of these voluntary housing agencies, which to my mind should be investigated. Why can't the local authorities just be empowered with the capital to build houses? Why do you need all these multiple housing agencies, many of whom, in one instance, one of them took out a €2 million loan to get new offices at a city centre location when they already had city centre location otherwise? How many chief executives, how many millions are we wasting on that setup? Really, Minister, we're talking about lives here, and the response of this government has been hopelessly inadequate.
Thank you.